So I'm taking over temporarily. I'm taking over Pastor Lecky's senior Bible study. And yeah, just while he kind of gets some strength back. And he's doing really well. He also has physical therapy like 3 times a week, so scheduling is very difficult for him. There we go, finally went through. But I made a joke today, because it's not tomorrow, it'll be next week. But I made the joke that I don't even know if I remember how to teach classes when I'm not in front of a camera, which I don't do youth in front of a camera. But anyway.
So we're going to have a Thursday Bible study.
Yep, next Thursday there will be a Bible study. And my plan, at least, is to do what he had planned as well. I talked with him about it. He said that the plan for that was a history of Israel. And my current plan, I don't have anything written for it yet, I think is probably worth saying it won't be a history of Israel, because if you do a history of Israel, you have to start in like the 30s. And that's not what you guys are interested in. So we're going to do the history of the region geographically. It will probably start right around the time of Christ and kind of move real fast. Survey kind of stuff. What was that?
You're not taking it.
I'm not going to record it. Not because I have any compunctions about recording it, but that's not the tradition there. And like I said, I don't actually need to be recorded. Everything I say is not worthy of posterity. So, although I will say, someone at Pastor Strickett's funeral yesterday did request that I reprise my intertestamental class. So, who knows? We'll see if I do that one again in one form or another. I will say, if I do, it'll probably be on the podcast, not in an actual class. Who knows? All right, so we are in the formula of Concord. It's been like a month since we've met, but here we are again with Article 4, specifically on good works. So for the rest of this class, as far as I am planning currently, we will still be taking one article per class with one exception, and that's next week. So I'm combining the article on the law and the gospel and the third use of God's law. And I was doing a little bit of prep work, looking ahead kind of stuff, and I think I'm just going to bring my confirmation lesson in here, because it's basically my law gospel confirmation class, except that one's 2 hours and a little bit more, so I'm going to have to even condense it down even for this group. But we'll cross that bridge next week when we get there. That being said, to my knowledge right now, we are going to run every Wednesday through. I don't foresee any other breaks to the schedule. I didn't foresee a 3-week break to the schedule. I did foresee breaks in the schedule, but I was planning on spreading them out more, but such is life. Here we are. One of the things that, just to kind of get us back into the formula, of course, this is the last of the confessional documents. We're looking at about the year 1580, and it's a nice, good round number to use, although, nothing's ever simple. This is kind of third generation reformer. So we had Martin Luther, of course, and then you have Philip Melanchthon, and for what it's worth, we sang a Melanchthon hymn on Sunday. The late service did. The sermon hymn praising God for the angels and spiritual warfare. So that was written by Philip Melanchthon. He's the guy that wrote the Augsburg Confession and all of that. And then you have this third generation of reformers. Kind of the epitome of them is, if you're going to put it down to one person, is Martin Chemnitz, known as the second Martin Luther, or the second Martin, right? Of course, Martin Luther being the first. He and Jacob Andre are the ones who put this document together primarily. And the purpose of everything we've been covering so far is to deal with controversies in the church that had arisen specifically within the Lutheran Church, but of course to address continuing pressures from outside of the Lutheran Church. But this is, unlike some of the other documents in the Book of Concord, this is an internal memo, if you will. This was a Lutheran confession meant for Lutherans. And as such, we've seen a number of these controversies, and we've recognized, at least so far, basically every time we're taking the middle line, which, I mean, Aristotle would approve of that message. This is generally the right course of action, right? Is typically both sides are wrong. Go down the middle and you'll be all right. There has been, it's kind of hard the way we're doing this split up the way we are, but there's definitely been kind of a movement and a flow within the Book of Concord, right? Or not within the Book of Concord, within the formula of Concord. As we, from our first lesson on original sin, we covered free will, we looked at the righteousness by faith, and today we're looking at good works, and then it's going to be law and gospel and third use of the law, and then continuing on from there. So far, at least, the main emphasis, the main thrust of the formula has really been dealing with the, if you will, the interaction between God and man surrounding salvation. And so what is salvation? What is righteousness? Who is responsible for what? Who does what? What can we take credit for? What does God take credit for? How do we interact with these things? And that continues on today in good works. As the reformers here really do struggle with, well, and we'll get into in details, but they struggle with how Lutherans should deal and interact with good works, right? Of course, we know this is a major facet of the Reformation, right? Obviously, Luther is fighting hard against the kind of doctrine of salvation by works. And so you kind of see that Luther's generation of reformers, and even Philip Melanchthon's for that matter, don't really wrestle with this problem. They don't wrestle with the problem of good works because they're fighting so hard against it, right? They're fighting against this idea that you save yourself by what you do. Hallmark of the Reformation, right? When you're fighting that hard, there's not much time for nuance, right? By the time we get to Chemnitz and Andre and this third generation of reformers, we're far enough removed from the big beat-down battle of are you saved by faith or are you saved by works? And now the reformers say, okay, we know that you are saved by faith, but we also know the Bible talks a lot about good works. So how should we, as Lutherans, interact, deal with, think about all these sorts of things? Good works, right? Because clearly they are a relevant thing in the area of Christian living. And so here today we turn our attention to how should we, as Lutherans, who recognize salvation by faith, how should we actually interact? How should we think of good works? All right, and this was the topic of my sermon 2 weeks ago because I've been thinking about this a lot as I prepped, and James came in and helped me out. I'm not today, I mean, I made the kind of joke in that sermon that the formula of Concord here kind of starts and ends the conversation. It gives you none of the down-to-earth action items. Today we're not going to talk about the action items. If you want those, go listen to that sermon, right? Today we're going to deal with kind of what is the problem, what's the solution, the kind of big picture sort of things. But before we do that, any questions either on this or anything else that we've covered so far in the class itself? Or I suppose on anything, right? All right, so let's get into Article 4 of the Formula of Concord here. As is the tradition here, we recognize that the authors here have this wonderful layout, right? The status of the controversy, the things you say in favor, the things you say against, right? And this article in particular, I almost want to say simplistic, it's very clean, right? When we were dealing with original sin, for instance, a lot of nuances, a lot of things coming from all over the place. This article on good works doesn't have as much of that. It's very much, here's the issue, here's what we say about it, and then we're done, all right? So once again, we want to recognize that the authors here will note that there are two sides of this controversy. This controversy is really what is the interaction, what is the meaningfulness, how should Christians think of good works? And so obviously, and so the two sides that we really have with this is one, that good works are necessary for salvation, and two, that good works are harmful to salvation, right? And we'll recognize that once we settle that question, another kind of afterthought question comes up. So it's not quite totally cut and dry. We have to hit two things today, right? And so this first one is that there are two sides to the good works problem, if you will. That good works are necessary for salvation, and that good works are harmful to salvation. So, before we dive in, what do you guys think?
How would they be harmful?
How would they be harmful? Okay, I think this might be most people's reaction, right? Is how in the world are good works harmful to salvation? All right? Anyone have any ideas and thoughts as to how good works can be harmful to salvation?
Maybe pride.
Pride's a big part of
it. You feel like you're saving yourself. That thing you take your focus off.
Right. Yeah. So when the idea that good works are harmful to salvation starts to get into like Pharisaism, they will say papism as well, sort of thing. This idea that because of the things you are doing, you are earning your salvation, right? It puffs you up, there's pride, all of that sort of thing. And so in that sense, the idea was that, well, good works are harmful to your salvation, right? And of course, the other side is good works are necessary to salvation, right? I think we talk about first generation Reformation enough, we got a handle on that one and kind of what's going on there, right? This idea that if you do not do good works, you will not be saved, right? So, how do we feel about these two statements?
Neither are correct.
That's one way to put it.
I'm sorry, what did you say? Neither are correct.
Yeah, so one way to put this is that neither are correct. Another way to put it, and this might be a little dramatic, and we'll get it, I'm pushing as a teacher here, right? Is that they're both correct, right? You have heard me in this class alone say both of those things. I have told you that when we covered the John's epistles, I know for sure, I told you that good works are necessary for salvation, right? And we're going to talk about how I'm not necessarily a Lutheran heretic for saying that, right? Even though there is a line that says you should not say. Well, anyway, I've also told you, and this I've said it more in the pulpit than I can think of, that good works are harmful to your salvation, right? So how is it that I have said both of these things to you, and I don't think I am running too much afoul of Article 4 of the Formula of Concord? What's going on?
If you think good works will, save you somehow, that's harmful because you're not getting the right idea.
Well, right, and so I think that's kind of the key here, right? One of the assignments I was given in my law gospel class at the seminary under Dr. Kolb, who, if you don't know who Dr. Kolb is, he's the one who translated this. He had us. This is about like the application of law and gospel in ministry, and he said. Here it is. I'll give you the actual paper that I was told to write, the prompt I was given. You're a pastor, you're preaching a sermon, and you see a young lady in church for the first time. She comes in late. You've never seen her before. She looks very upset. But she leaves before the end of the service. Just kind of off in a hurry, right? On Monday, she shows up in your office. And she asks you, the pastor, can you be saved if you have an abortion? And I understand this is a political comment, so we're not going to talk about any of that. But what do you do as a pastor? How do you respond to that, right? I'm sorry, I forgot one part. She said, I need an answer right now. I'm late to something. I need to go, right? That's the last part. There we go. That's an important detail.
I'm doing what?
A one-word answer, I gotta go. I'm in a hurry, right?
Okay.
So, what do you do as a pastor? What's the answer? Yes or no? You can be saved if you get an abortion, or you cannot be saved if you get an abortion.
Yes, you can. Any sin is from...
Right, and by the way, this is in the part of seminary. This is very early. This is a first-year paper, and the the systematicians who are teaching you at this point love to give you papers where both answers are correct. It's about how you defend yourself, right? The answer is both yes and no, right? Which is why it's an interesting paper to write. And you guys have gone to the good Lutheran default, which is you defaulted to the proclamation of the gospel, right? That yes, anyone can be saved, right? Jesus covers everything, right? Because what you don't know, and this is also partly what this is getting at, is you don't know where this woman actually is. You know that she's struggling with this, but you don't know, presumably, if she ran out of church on Sunday to go and get an abortion, or if she's leaving your office to go and get an abortion, because that changes your answer, right? So, assuming that the sin has already been committed, well then, of course, God can forgive you. As a person who's crushed with the law, they need the gospel, right? In the other sense, if they're looking for permission, it's like, well, if Jesus can forgive me, I'm just going to go do this sin I want, whatever sin I want, right? In this case, it's abortion, but pick your poison, right? Well, then the answer is no. No, you can't do that, right? And so the answer changes based on where the person is. And this isn't intended to be, or it isn't a two-faced sort of answer, right? It's an answer that changes based on the situation the individual is in, right? If someone is crushed with the law, you don't give them more law, right? You give them gospel. If someone is puffed up about their, the guarantee, presuming on their salvation, then they need the law to crush them a little bit, right? As both Luther and CFW Walther say, the appropriate application of the law and the gospel is what makes a doctor of the church. And so we recognize this is a hard thing to do in practice. The same sort of thing is going on here. So the same question, and it's similar, right? Is good works are necessary for salvation. Well, if you think you can just do whatever you want, this is that law answer. It's like, you think you can just do whatever you want, live however you want to live, then you got to be doing good. God is expecting you to do good works, right? And this, we're going to get into the more finer ways to say these things in a bit here. Meanwhile, if you are being burdened and, right, have I done enough? And the answer is no. In fact, your good works are even harmful for your salvation, right? So the answer, this is a little bit, this fine line middle ground we're taking today is a little bit different than the original sin one, where both answers are wrong. In this one, both have some truth to them. And that's why the middle line needs to be locked. And the way that we're going to manage this is with very precise language, basically. I suppose it's the same way we handle original sin. There's more philosophy going on in that one. This one's just more a matter of being very careful about the way we say things, right? So we're going to pause there. I'm now 3 lines into my outline here, but that's all right. Questions or comments here, because I do want to make sure we have grip on where we're starting before we go any further.
If you would just answer with only one thing that condemns unbelief,
right?
then she can decide for herself what category she puts in.
Oh, you're trying to cheat the answer, right? Some guys tried that and they got a please rewrite. These were pass-fail papers. You had 3 attempts, and I will say, I didn't pass Greek or Hebrew before I got to seminary, so I took summer Greek and then fall Hebrew. So I wasn't allowed to take any of these classes until the winter quarter. But if you took these systems classes, you had 3 pass-fail papers. You had 3 attempts to get the pass on all of them. If you took them in the fall semester or the fall quarter, that meant partly that you went to a Concordia and that they needed to beat you down a few pegs. Because the guys that came from Concordias, I am friends with many of them, but a number of them will come to seminary with the understanding that they don't actually have anything to learn. They're punching a card until they're ready to be a pastor, right? And so they go to these systems classes and they write their first paper, pass, fail. They hand it in, and it comes back with a big fail, try again, and lots of red on it. It is guaranteed that you fail your first write. They will fail the first one, and word gets around after the first one goes out that no one passes the first one. For the fall class, you also don't pass your second one for any of the papers. They wait till your third one before you finally just learn enough to just write down the things they wrote down on your paper and just hand it in and say, here is my humble submission, master system petition, and then you're good, right? It's Lutheran mind, it's a class meant to knock you down a few pegs. I took it in the winter, which meant that we always failed our first draft, but if we didn't do too bad, we could pass our second round. Not everyone passed their second one, but if you paid enough attention, so I was able to pass a couple of my second attempts on these papers. It's because, if you have to go to fall Hebrew, then they know that humbles you a little bit as it is. So they're not quite as worried about knocking you down a little bit. By the way, we warned Matt about this before he went to seminary. We said, you're gonna start failing papers. It is a feature that you can do nothing about. And if you don't think that they can't find something to fail you on, some of these guys really tried, man. But as it happens, these professors who have been teaching systems classes for decades are pretty good at finding things you said that are wrong. They're very good at it, in fact. But anyway, Bill, you're gonna have to rewrite. They'll probably tell you to stop being a chicken and take a stand. Yeah, let's say stop being a chicken, Bill. Take a stand. Defend yourself. No, to be fair, that is a reasonable thing to say. So this is where we're starting, and it's probably where we're saying dealing with the second aspect, which, to be fair, is kind of where I picked up with my sermon. I kind of bypassed this initial controversy, and they do too. They address it, but by and large, there's not terrible disagreement with the reformers at this point on this first two sides of the issue thing. The one where there's more schism, let's say, that's a word he uses in there. And so, right, it says, afterward a schism arose between some theologians because of two words, necessary and free. And so the idea here is, and we're going to use a new term, and I said it in a joking way in my sermon, right? Because I said we're Lutherans, we can't talk about good works, so instead we're going to talk about the new obedience, which is just good works from what Christians doing it, right? It's the same thing. But the question here is, when we talk about the new obedience, so that's the life of the Christian, basically, the question is the new obedience necessary in Christians, or are Christians free to live in the new obedience? And so this is where they really start splitting hairs on are the Christians, when Christians live in the new obedience, is that something they are compelled to do, or is it something they do freely of their own accords, right? So what do you guys think? Okay, yeah, that's actually, we're going to get there. That's a fairly solid answer. It's not quite the way they manage it, but it's pretty close, right? That the new obedience is because of salvation, that kind of thing. And one thing you may or may not have recognized that you did there that I think is actually really helpful, and I'm going to drill down on this, is, here we go. It's actually going to be the second point on the affirmative statement. So we're going to push forward here. And we'll come back up to point one, don't worry. We believe, teach, and confess, this is line 7 under affirmative statements. We believe, teach, and confess that good works should be entirely excluded from the question about salvation, just as they are excluded from the article of justification before God. So this is how the reformers really deal with this problem. They say that we need to talk about new obedience, good works, whatever you want to call it, but we need to make sure that we avoid salvation by works. How do we do that? We say, you don't get to talk about good works if you're talking about salvation. Those two are not, they don't go together in the same conversation, right? So one way to kind of think of this, there's actually some Latin phrases that build it up, but I'm actually going to skip those for you today, right? Think about, Bill, you're going to know what I'm talking about for sure. They're rectangle cabinet things, right? And there's all sorts of little drawers. And you put nuts and bolts in them that you're convinced you're going to use, but you never look at again, right? Yeah. All right. I don't know about you two gentlemen. You probably have it. Okay. Right. The other. What was that?
Every now and then.
Oh yeah. The other alternative is old jelly jars and things like that are sitting. Right? Am I getting a little bit too close to home? I think I am with the way Annabeth just reacted to that comment. Do you have some empty jelly jars full of odds and ends? Right. Anyway, think about theology as that little plastic drawer separator. We have the drawer here for salvation. And we talk about all the salvation stuff there. When we shut it. And then we have our justification drawer. We talk about everything with justification. And we shut it, right? And then we talk about good works and new obedience. Separate drawer. You don't take them out together and dump them on the same table, right? They remain entirely oil and water, do not mix, stay separated, right? Actually, better than oil and water, this is water and sodium, right? Do you guys know what happens when you put sodium in water? I got enough scientists in here, right? It explodes. So leave them apart. Bad things happen if you mix them, right? Now, one of the things that I think is worth recognizing is that these divisions are technically entirely arbitrary. They are of human concoction so that we of finite minds can actually talk about this stuff in a meaningful way, right? I use this same sort of imagery when I teach the Trinity to the confirmands in particular. And I say, well, we can talk about the Trinity as the economic Trinity, right? God is to us. The Father is at the top, and He sends the Son, right? All that. And then we can talk about the immanent Trinity, God is to Himself, where everyone's co-equal and co-eternal, neither confusing or dividing, all that kind of stuff. So they're both true at the same time. They're both connected, but our brains aren't quite developed enough as humanity to be able to figure it all out. So we have to compartmentalize. It's kind of what's going on here. For us to be able to really get a firm grasp of any kind of what we are dealing with good works, we have to entirely separate ourselves from salvation and justification. So, that is to say, as we're honing in on our precise vocabulary of this, right? If we are saying good works are necessary for salvation, or good works are harmful for salvation, we're immediately recognizing that we're getting off on the wrong foot. It's really not a question that makes sense. It's kind of, in many ways, it's a nonsensical question. It's good works and salvation don't have anything to do with one another, right? Good works and justification don't have anything to do with one another. Now, if you really want to start pairing good works with something, we can bring sanctification in. That's fair game. Sanctification is the life of the Christian, kind of from a different angle, right? So in this sense, good works don't save you. Good works don't damn you, although that'd be a really strange sort of picture, right? Because good works are not categorically connected to salvation, right? That's the big Martin Luther thing, is divorcing works and salvation entirely. Now that they're divorced from one another, I'll say, okay, how does the Christian who has already been saved interact with good works, right? Recognizing that the two are split apart from one another. Is that?
Back up a minute. Everything is okay till you get to the book of James.
No, it's not. I mean, yes, it is. I fundamentally disagree with what you just said. Recognize do you remember what I preached on 2 weeks ago when I talked about good works in relation to the confessions? It was the Epistle of James.
I'm was thinking of faith without works is dead.
Oh, right, and that's a. Okay, no, because I see where you're coming from, but that actually doesn't conflict with what the Reformers are saying here at all. So when we say that good works and salvation cannot be in the same category, and this might be a little strange to say, but good works and damnation are, or can be, right? So this is what James is saying. He's saying, here, now, hold on. Let me actually give you a quote from the... Of course, I don't have this one highlighted. Oh, it's right at the end of negative statements, isn't it? All right, here we go. So right at the end of the article here. So this is line 19 of negative statements. This is the last paragraph. Is in connection here, Bill, with what you're talking about with James. We also reject and condemn the teaching that faith and the indwelling of the Holy Spirit are not lost by willful sin, but that the saints and elect retain the Holy Spirit even though they fall into adultery and others. Right, so there's two things going on. One is that if there's sin, the Holy Spirit doesn't just disappear. The other thing that is meant here, and I'm thinking is not actually in the section that I just said. Anyway, can faith be lost? Can salvation be lost due to willful, active, or repetitive sin? The answer to that is yes, right? Does that help at all? Because like I said, I don't think James is disagreeing with the Reformers here.
I was kind of being the devil's advocate.
That's
fine.
That's good. No, and that's totally fine. And one of the things that we kind of touch on here is something that happens from time to time, right? Christians have been talking theology for 2,000 years, right? The Bible is the rule and norm of theology, right? This became a small problem at Nicaea when the people at Nicaea used words that weren't in the Bible. And now people are like, well, are you sure? Anyway. Let's go to 1 John. We have an example of this that none of you freak out about in 1 John. And we've already talked about it in the formula of Concord, right? I am by nature sinful and unclean. All right? I told you a month and a half ago at this point, that human nature is not by nature sinful and unclean, right? And you might say, well, hold on. That is entirely not what John said, and that's a big problem, right? The way we respond to that is the way language developed and the way language developed while the biblical language stayed frozen, right? So when John says we are by nature sinful and unclean, he is not dealing with terms like ousia and persona and all these other really loaded terms that we get later in theological and philosophical development. So we can say that when John says we are by nature sinful and unclean, what he means is what we say in Article 1 of the formula here, that the human nature has been corrupted, but it is not inseparable from that corruption, right? Yeah. So this is just, I bring this up because this is an example of theological language kind of almost outpacing biblical language, simply because the biblical language isn't updated, right? I mean, I know we do translations, New King James is a thing, right? But that's not what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is we will use terms in ways that they aren't used in the Bible sometimes. It doesn't happen terribly often because it gets really confusing and problematic when that happens. This is another one of these places where when you start looking at some of the things the Bible says about good works, and you have to say, well, we need to understand that in the context of what the Bible is actually meaning when it says these things. So for example, I made Judy read it a while back. I wrote a paper on justification in the church fathers. And I looked specifically at 2 letters written by the first generation of Christians after the apostles. One of them was Polycarp's epistle to the Philippians, and the other was Clement's epistle to someone. I don't remember. Anyway, I looked at 2 of these letters, basically. And I was trying to answer this question. Did the first generation of Christians understand salvation by faith or salvation by works? And the secondary sources were great on this. It was so much fun, right? Because you read the Lutheran or the Protestant leaning sources, and you get all these quotes from these guys. From Polycarp is the one I remember specifically, where Polycarp is writing and he says, we are saved completely apart from anything we do. It is all the work of Christ. And you go, man, slam dunk Lutherans, right? Nailed it. And then you read a Catholic leaning source that quotes the same guy in the same letter who says things like, without works, none are saved. Salvation is dependent on the things that you do. And you go, well, slam dunk for 16th century Catholics, right? And you go, well, hold on, what's happening? And then it gets worse. I didn't think it was going to get worse, Bill, did you? It gets worse because you realize when you actually look up the quote, you're like, well, context, I'm sure, will solve this problem. You recognize that these 2 quotes you're receiving are the same sentence. It's not even a different, it is a comma that separates these 2 lines, right? It was shocking to me. And you're like, is Polycarp an idiot? Is he just like completely off his rocker? Doesn't he understand the 16th century implications of the things that he's saying? The answer is no. He has no idea this is a controversy. Polycarp, what I can test in my papers, Polycarp couldn't conceive of a distinction between faith and works. To him, that distinction didn't exist. He saw them as part and parcel of the same thing. And I then go on in my paper to argue for what he thinks distinctions are within faith and that kind of thing. Which is, for him, it's obedience, disobedience. And trust and non-trust kind of thing. Really interesting, the way these early guys. But a big part of this paper was we shouldn't expect people 2,000 years ago to be able to accurately comment on things happening 500 years ago, or even today, right? Instead, we need to recognize contextually, what is this guy, what is this biblical author even, what are they actually saying? What are they actually teaching? I have a great quote out of here that I just love, and it fits this precisely. This is paragraph 7 under affirmative statements, line 12. And I'm gonna misquote it slightly because it's not quite what they're saying, but I love it anyway. This is not to be understood in any other way than as the Lord Christ and his apostles themselves declare, right? And then they go on, right? Do you know why I love this? It's because this quote is basically saying we're supposed to understand what they actually meant, right? It's like, well, thank you.
Yeah.
This is line 12 under affirmative statements, paragraph 7, the third one from the end. This is not to be understood in any other way than as the Lord Christ and his apostles themselves declare, right? And we'll read the quote in more fully because they do explain what they actually meant. But I just love that little out of context quote. It's like, I had a choir director once who would always tell us to do things that were wrong, and when usually some of the people in the choir would call him out on it, he would just shout back, "Do what I mean, not what I said." I think that fits here, right? The reformers are basically saying, do what they mean, not what you thought they meant, kind of thing, right? Right. I mean, yeah. Jim Coe is an excellent choir director. He's a wonderful, godly man. Lots of fun. But this isn't about Jim Coe. So when we kind of deal with, particularly James comes up when we deal with good works, we need to recognize that, and this is one of the way I phrase it to kind of adversarial people who talk to me about this, is I say something along the lines of, I have a fundamental belief that James and Paul do not disagree with one another, right? The Holy Spirit wrote both of these things, or inspired both of these documents, and so they're in agreement with one another. The question then, and I'll admit, right, and we need to figure out, there are arguments in both directions, right? But the thing we need to figure out is how they are in agreement with one another. How do we understand them both in a way that they are coherent, right? Because people don't always do that. Good. Questions before, well, let's see. This was technically on the, we believe, teach, and confess that good works should be entirely excluded from the question of salvation. And my posit is that even James keeps them separate from salvation, although he does recognize that. And I'm trying to be careful with my phrases here, but basically a lack of good works can be damning. That, I think, is a safe way to say it. There is an unsafe way to say it as well, and we're going to get there as we go on. So if there aren't any other questions, we will... All right, we're going to back up just a bit to affirmative statements, paragraph 1 here. So basically the first thing that they say on good works. Good works certainly and without doubt follow true faith, if it is not dead, but a living faith, just as fruit grows on a good tree. This is the metaphor that the reformers like when talking about good works. There's a lot of metaphors in the Solid Declaration that they really don't like, metaphors that I have on occasion used. It wasn't supposed to, right? But the metaphor that they like here is, and it's a biblical one, so that's good, is that Christians will produce good fruit just like a healthy tree produces good fruit, right? It's just the nature of the thing. The tree doesn't think about producing good fruit. It doesn't make an effort to produce good fruit. It just produces fruit, right? And Jesus talks this way regularly. In fact, I don't know this for sure, but it seems in my estimation, just thinking back, he talks about works and fruit more than any other way he talks about works, right? We got I am the vine, you are the branches, and then bearing good fruit, bearing fruit in keeping with repentance. That's in an epistle, though. Jude or something, I don't know which one. I haven't taught that book yet, so I have it locked away, right? All these parables about, looking for fruit in these vineyards and them not producing, so we put them over into management, right? The fruit image is the one that's used. And once again, we need to recognize that this is coming after salvation, right? If we're going to use some of our free will conversation, right, where we said that before salvation, before justification, you don't have free will because you're dead, right? Dead trees don't produce fruit. The tree first needs to be made alive again. And that part is the salvation part. After it has been made alive again, because it has been made alive again, and because it is now a good tree, it will, by its nature, produce good fruit. So this is when they say good works certainly and without doubt follow true faith, right? So if there is true faith, fruit comes. Good works happen, right? That being said, this might be in the Solid Declaration. One thing we want to avoid is using good works as a comfort of salvation, right? So, it is true, good works are evidence of faith, right? However, the Christian who is doubting their salvation should not be encouraged to look to their fruit. Should not be encouraged to look to their good works. Why not?
What is a good fruit?
Good fruit and good work here. I'm just putting it together.
Oh, I know, but if someone's looking at their...
Okay, so part of it is it's unclear.
I did something good here, and my boss thought it was great. My wife thought it was loud.
Yeah, right?
Okay,
So I think if you want to really drill down this, we'll say love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, right? We'll just use fruit of the Spirit. They're not equivalent, but the word karpon is used for both, right?
Well, I just have a question.
Yeah.
I've known a lot of people that do a lot of good things.
Yes.
To a lot of other people or places.
Yes.
And they're not Christian.
You're absolutely correct.
So,
Let me find the relevant part of my notes. This is the hard part about doing the solid declaration separately, is I cannot be bothered to reconcile my notes with one another. So I'm sorry, that's just one step too far for me. It's here somewhere, I promise you. Works done apart from faith, all right, may be commendable and even rewarded by God in the temporal realm. Yet, in God's sight, they are still sinful and displeasing, right? So, this is one of the things we need to recognize, is that who is capable of doing a true, in the theological sense, good work? Is only those who have been saved, right? Who is capable of doing what is in the world's eyes a good work? Anyone, right? And so what the Reformers here are recognizing is something called righteousness coram mundo, or righteousness before the world, is that is a distinct thing than righteousness before God, right? So while the world sees what these pagan philanthropists are doing, right? Let's just use them as a carte blanche example, right? As a good thing. And it is, right? They're doing real legitimate good in the world, right? While God may even reward that, the reward is only in the temporal realm, which is a Reformation way of saying it's only a reward on earth, right? And so I think one of the ways, from a practical standpoint, that we can see this is, you imagine like a charity run by, there are no Christians involved, wherever, right? And God seems to be blessing the work of this charity, right? Good things are coming about it, from it. Maybe even the directors win some awards, right? Nobel Peace Prize or something. Oh, what a wonderful accolade and reward on earth, right? And because they have the Nobel Peace Prize, now they have a bigger house or something. I don't know. We recognize that all those things can be true, yet because the earthly work was done without faith, it is, right, sinful and displeasing, right? Which seems almost like a bridge too far. To say that a good work done by someone without faith is displeasing to God. But we recognize that it is. Good in the sense that everything done outside of faith is displeasing to God and mired in sin, right? And so here, we're going to hit some real distinctions here where we need to kind of, not distinctions, additional sub-controversies, right? And here's one of them, is that can wicked people do good works? Well, as long as we're understanding all those words correctly, yes. But in the divine sense, which is why I do think the word new obedience is, or that term is helpful here. Can a non-believer participate in the new obedience? No. It's a fundamental impossibility for them, right? They might still do good stuff, but they are not in the new obedience to Christ, right? So, good, excellent point there, Annabelle. Absolutely. All right, let's see. Good, anything else on that? All right, we already hit 2 about excluding entirely from the discussion of salvation. We're going to skip down, not that 3 is not helpful, but because we have time, skip down to paragraph 4, so line 9, paragraph 4. In this sense, the words necessary, shall, and must are used correctly and in a Christian way to describe the regenerate and are in no way contrary to the form of sound words and speech. So, for someone, a pastor, to say good works are necessary, you shall do good works, or you must do good works, is an appropriate thing for me to say. Now, you'll notice that those sentences had periods at the end of them, not commas, right? Because for me to say good works are necessary for salvation, wrong. That is an incorrect sentence, right? Because what have I done? I mixed sodium and water. No. Good works are necessary for the Christian? Okay. Good works are necessary for salvation? No. No dice. That's a bridge too far. Do we understand the difference there? Right? All right, so we're going to drive this one straight into the next paragraph, right? So nevertheless, if the words mentioned, necessity and necessary, are used when talking about regenerate people, then only due obedience, not coercion, is to be understood. So, you must do good works. Accurate sentence. To say God therefore coerces you to do good works is incorrect. The life of new obedience is not one of force or coercion. It is one of, here we go, I have, it's a one of, here, we'll just do it this way. The free spirit obeys not from fear or obligation, but from love. All right? So what is driving the new obedience in the Christian is not fear of punishment. It is not God forcing you like an automaton. It is the fact that you have the love of Christ inside of you. Therefore, you will do good works. All right? So does that kind of... This is one of those where it makes sense unless you really think hard about it, and then it gets a little slippery. So don't think too hard about this, right? We're going to talk about childlike faith. We have been in the readings for like 3 weeks now, right? This is one, the childlike understanding of this one. You do it because you want to, not because you have to. Leave it there, right? That being said, all the words necessary is still correct. So, like I said, don't squeeze this fish too tightly or it'll slip away or something like that. Some appropriate metaphor. Judy, you got something for me? Mm-mm. You're making faces over there.
Oh, no, I'm just thinking, it's almost, I guess it suddenly hit me that if you are saved, you almost can't help but do good work.
I didn't have this highlighted. If we go into the next sentence there, or the next paragraph, is we also believe, teach, and confess that when it is said, the regenerate do good works from a free spirit, this is not to be understood as though it were an option for the regenerate person to do or not do good when he wants, as though a person can still, this is what I was looking for earlier, as though a person can still retain faith if he intentionally perseveres in sins, right? So, good works are necessary. You do them out of free will and love as the regenerate individual. You don't have a choice in the matter, right? I mean, it seems like we're flip-flopping here a little bit, but I think that we can hold this all together.
And at times we don't even know we're doing them, like Matthew 25.
Right. I think that's a key aspect to this, is that the Christian will just do good works by nature of being a Christian. It does not require, it both does and does not require effort, right? I mean, we're called to mortify the flesh and to seek these things out, right? So effort is involved here to live out the Christian life, but it will happen naturally as well, right? Yes?
Well, I just have another question,
Mm-hmm.
is, do you think God then gives you better points or something in heaven for what you do?
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, this is a hard question to answer, actually, which is surprising. It seems like it shouldn't be. The way we phrase this is that in eternal life, there are degrees of honor, but there are not degrees of bliss. Of bliss. That's the technical way to phrase it. So it means, will some people be exalted more highly than others? Get the better plates in heaven? Yes. I mean, it's a strange thing to say. It doesn't feel like it should be, but Jesus talks this way somewhat regularly, right? That being said, and I think this is where things get wacky, because y'all are a bunch of dirty, rotten sinners, right? Definitely not including myself in this, of course. But even though there will be levels of honor, exaltation, that kind of thing, there's not degrees of happiness or bliss or joy. That is all equal for everyone. I mention it a lot, but C.S. Lewis tries to capture this in The Great Divorce, which you still haven't read it. I don't know how you sit in my class when I talk about this so much without reading it. Well, I do, because I've been told to read lots of things that I haven't. But I still think you should read it. Where he witnesses, or he imagines kind of this scene in heaven, and there are definitely people that are more exalted than one another. And one person has a whole parade following them everywhere they go. But everyone's joyful about it, and there are people on vacation from hell in this story. They really don't understand this. They really have problems with this. They really have problems with this fact that some people are more exalted than others, and they're like, well, why don't you want to be top dog? And they're like, no, I'm happy. Everything's good. Everything's exactly as it should be. It's all wonderful. Like, why are you so bent out of shape about this? Like, the people from heaven also don't understand why the people from hell are freaking out so much, right? And like just can't get a grip on this. They're almost naive to jealousy, basically. They just don't understand it. And so that's that. And part of that degrees of exaltation, part of that is based on works and what you've done. Not all of it, though. Parts of it are based on endurance, what you had to suffer. That's another thing. It's one of those things where we're told about it, but don't worry about it. Because y'all are going to be just as happy as anyone else. And so that's one of those, God will sort it all out. It will all be good once you get there, sort of thing, right? I mean, yeah. I'm over here trying not to make a joke about how Annabeth's clearly the most holy of all of us, and she has to live with Bill, but I wouldn't actually make that joke on recordings.
I told her I want to be exalted, but I need to know what the bar is.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I mean, it's one of those things, right, that the more if you're trying to get yourself exalted, it ain't gonna work, right? That's, someone, I can't remember who it was, but someone has this really famous quote about the first being last and the last being first, and he who wants to be above everyone must be a servant of all. I forget who said that, but it seems apropos here. All right. Good. Anything else before we kind of hit our last affirmative statement that I really wanted to make sure we covered?
I've got a question.
Yeah.
So, and I don't want to sound obtuse, but what are good works? Do all good works involve one human being, one person helping another?
No, I don't think so. No.
Like if you see an injured animal and you give it care and nurse it back to health. I mean, the animal's one of God's creatures too. Is that?
What do we think? I have an answer, but I want to know what you all think. I think the answer is yes. Why? So other than the fact that I have a little bit of a tree hugger hippie in me, I like Lord of the Rings too much not to, right? But this isn't based on my feelings, right? So why do I think the answer is yes? We'll keep it real general. Okay. Taking care of God's creation is a good work. What do you guys think? I mean, that's like the first job, right? Is Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve were told to do a couple of things. They were told to have dominion, which is take care of the garden, basically, and they were told to make more people. Those were the only two rules in the garden. right? They did one of them all right, and the other one they hadn't gotten to, presumably. But yeah, oh, absolutely. God very much cares about his creation. I love it. And I'm teaching Jonah in the youth now, and we're going to be doing that. That's my spring class after Easter. You guys know how the book of Jonah ends? It's like one of the weirdest little one-liners in all of the Bible, I think. So it ends with this really great theological debate between Jonah and God about who is evil, right? Because Jonah thinks God is evil. That's the things he's saying. He says, God, what you are doing is evil. And really fascinating. The book ends not by answering the question, right? I mean, the answer is pretty presumed, right? I mean, Jonah is very much in the wrong. But it ends with God saying, is it not just and good for me to care about Nineveh? It's such a great city. There are so many people who live there, and a lot of cows too. Thus ends the book of Jonah. The last 3 words of Jonah are "and many cattle." And you're like, oh, hold on. Like, I'm with it. I'm with you, God. You're saying, I care about all those people in Nineveh. And then he says, and I care about the cows that would have gotten caught up in the fire and the brimstone too, right? And that's grievous enough to God that he includes it in this book, right? God does care about all his creation, right? I mean, this comes out in the Sermon on the Mount too, right? Lilies of the field, right? They don't labor or spin, but God cares for them. He takes care of them, right? So I don't think St. Francis of Assisi is technically recognized by the Lutheran Church, but taking care of animals is a good thing, right? So that's part of it. So no, good works are not always directed specifically at your neighbor. I will say we do want to be careful about that, though, because one of the errors that this does lead to is an error of the early church, which is basically monasticism. And it's great, right? So the guy who is credited with inventing monasticism, even though he learns from some monks, so I don't know why they just get left out. Anyway, Saint Anthony is credited with being the first monk. And do you know what he does? He wants to get away from people, and so the first time he goes and lives in a tomb, and people start showing up, and so he runs away, and he runs to an old abandoned Roman fort, and people start showing up. He gets really annoyed about this, right? The perhaps dramatic irony is that the more Antony ran away, the more people ran to go find him, right? But we want to recognize that, yes, Antony helped out a lot of people he was a lot of people's pastor, basically, when he was living as a monk in the desert, right? His desire to flee humanity was not a good one, right? You're supposed to live with your neighbors. So God used even that sin of Antony. By the way, Life of Antony by Athanasius is a wild ride. It's a great book. Lots of cool theological insights, but also lots of really wild stuff happening. People are not the only people that go to visit Antony while he's in a tomb. I'll just leave it at that, and you can go read The Life of Antony by St. Athanasius. By and large, the good works of the Christian relate to the neighbor, but I will say not exclusive.
Relates to what?
To your neighbor, to the people around you. What I mean, prayer in this sense, like private prayer and devotion, I think that would, I don't know, I'm hesitating to call it a good work, but it certainly is in line with the new obedience, right? And maybe it's that first generation reformer in me that doesn't like calling anything a good work, right? Or at least anything internal. But no, I mean, we're called to be in prayer, to be in the Word, and that's a good work, right? Or in this sense, it's part of this new obedience. And so this would be good fruit. Recognize that there's dangers to getting too insular and removing yourself from the world. We're called to be in this world, right? there's dangers to going too far the other direction, right? I mean, that's kind of where the social gospel ends up. There's a lot of good things about the social gospel. I mean, they take caring for the people around you very seriously, almost too seriously, and the social gospel can lose, the death and resurrection of Jesus and the reality of sins and that kind of thing. And so, just like this kind of cloistering movement, they come from good places, but when you push anything too far, you go wrong. Hence, like everything we've talked about in the Portland of Concord, right? Especially today, right? Both of our initial statements are true unless you mean them too much. Once you say them too fervently, then you're wrong. But yeah, no, that's a good, insightful question. Yes.
Well, I think that there are a lot of people doing a lot of good work in this church.
Oh, I think Rivercliff does a great job.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
but I mean, it's not always person to person. It can be through an organization or something.
Oh, absolutely, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like, anyone who ushers on Sunday morning, they're doing good works. And that's still service to neighbor. It's a neighbor inside the church, presumably, right? And maybe talk to a guest or something. But well, let's go with altar guild, right? All you serve on altar guild. You're only serving people inside the church, presumably. If Pastor Jordan and I are doing our jobs perfectly, you're not serving anyone outside the church, right? But it's still good works, right?
Well, look at the Braille ministry.
Oh, absolutely.
And things like that.
Oh, we have all sorts of examples here. No, you're absolutely right. Yeah, and I think Rivercliff does a pretty good job. I mean, I was wanting y'all to do better, right? But Rivercliff does a pretty good job of balancing a lot of these things as well. Of balancing what we in the business call in-reach and outreach. Right. We talk about outreach a lot. We don't talk about in-reach quite as much. In fact, how many of you have heard the phrase in-reach? In-reach? Yeah, outreach and in-reach, right? I mean, I think we should talk about in-reach more, right? In-reach is, at its most basic, is retention of members, basically, right? Outreach is getting new members. This is very stilted, right? In-reach is keeping your current members, right? I kind of weaseled my way out of my outreach project over Vicarage. I didn't intend to. I planned an outreach project and it fell apart. Not by my fault. And I kind of went, because on Vicarage, you have to do an outreach project. It's a whole big thing. And so we're in like April, and I'm going up, I've got due dates coming up. I go up to my supervisor, I'm like, I got nothing. Like this thing that I thought was gonna happen ended up not happening. I probably could have done a better job, blah, 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 blah. And he told me, he's like, calm down, right? He said, because once a week, I went out to it was a Lutheran retirement home, and I did devotions and stuff with people there. I just did it because, I partly did it because none of the other pastors wanted to, and I was like, oh, I'm fine with doing that, I got time, right? And he said, that's not outreach, that's inreach. He's like, this is a whole different thing. Like, how many people lose their faith in retirement homes, right? As C.S. Lewis said, right? I think it's in the Screw Tape Letters. It's like the one thing you don't want to do is kill someone early. Make them grow old. That's where you can really test a Christian. You can really test someone's mettle is in aging. My outreach project on Vicarage was only to Christians, basically, or at least people in a Lutheran retirement home. It was an in-reach project, and so I think this is getting back to Rivercliff. I think Rivercliff does a good job of serving the needs of the congregation, the needs of the church at large, and the needs of those outside of the church. Like I said, we can always do better. I always want to encourage us, and I assume y'all are doing a good job on an individual basis. I have no idea because I don't see any of y'all outside of church functions, unless I run into you at Home Depot or something like that.
And I think a lot of the in-reach, we don't notice because it's person to person.
Especially within Rivercliff. I guess the Braille work, that's kind of a combo outreach, in-reach sort of thing. But yeah, and then There's something else I had in mind for an in-reach thing that wasn't just Rivercliff, but
What about like family promise?
I mean so, oh man, this is not what I thought I was going to talk about. This is good. We talk about, we here, leadership, mostly Pastor Jordan and I, kind of, we have, especially with the community center, we've been trying to figure out if the things we're doing there are the right things to be doing, right? Because the church is about the business of sharing the gospel, right? Take Second Chance. I mean, they're meeting over there right now, basically. Do we share the gospel with Second Chance? No. I've done it technically twice, and that's because one of them showed up on Sunday morning, so that doesn't count. And another one came in here and chatted with me because he went to the wrong building and he was 20 minutes early anyway. So that's the only interaction I've had with Second Chance. It's a recovery group. Can't really have any more interaction with Second Chance. So Pastor Jordan and I, for a little while, struggled with, well, should we have it here? We're not sharing the gospel. We kind of said, well, are we providing for a need in the community? Right? Serving the least of those around us. Yeah. Even if it's not gospel-oriented proclamation stuff, doesn't mean it's not wrong, right? And so we do stuff like Second Chance. Family Promise is one of those that's kind of in the middle. Because fundamentally, Family Promise is just human care, right? But I know people who are here overnight, they talk with people. And so that's inroads for gospel proclamation, right? And we've talked about all the various community partners and things like that we have and kind of said, okay, where do they fall on this spectrum of like straight gospel proclamation, which we really don't have, and straight just like human care and activities. Even one level of human care is hospitality, right? The fencing, that's a hospitality thing. That's just providing a place for the community, or a community, to get together. So that's a pure hospitality sort of thing. And one of the things that we've talked about between the two of us is which of these community partners and other groups can we shift down the spectrum in an appropriate way, and how do we go about doing that? And that is harder than the ideas are super easy, right? I mean, great prospects. Let's go do a chapel service with them. Reality, not feasible. That's just not a thing, right? And so we've talked about how could we, what are the possibilities of shifting more towards gospel orientation, but recognizing that even if we don't, it's still a good thing, right? So, more good questions. By the way, I'm fine if we never talk about anything I wrote down, so if you guys have questions, I'm always all about that. That's the better way to do this, I think, at least. One thing, though, I do want to make sure we talk about, because when I was reading through this, I thought it was tremendously insightful. Even so much so that I mentioned it in the sermon, and I put an asterisk next to it on my notes, which I don't tend to do. And this is paragraph 9 under affirmative statements, line 14. I'll bump up to 8. Let's give it a little bit of context, right? However, this willingness, the liberty of spirit, in God's elect children is not perfect, right? Say that again, we all know. It is burdened with great weaknesses, as St. Paul complains about himself in Romans and Galatians. Here's what I think is one of the biggest insights and nuggets for you out of this whole article. Nevertheless, for the sake of the Lord Christ, the Lord does not charge this weakness to his elect. As it is written, there is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. So, good works are necessary. They are done by your free spirit. You are imperfect in doing them. When you are imperfect, you are not condemned. Right? That is, I think, a really key insight here. Is your imperfection sin? Yes, absolutely. Right, you're supposed to be perfect. Right, be perfect like your Father in heaven is perfect. Right, but are you condemned for that? Does God hold it against you when you fall short? The answer is no. Why not? Well, the simple answer, just quoting here, is for the sake of Christ, right? But let's also recognize, I mean, and that's good, but let's kind of drive this point home. Who is doing good works? Those who have already been saved. You're already in the state of grace, right? You're imperfect, you still have weakness, right? But you are already saved. All your sins, including the ones where you aren't doing all the things perfectly like you're supposed to, have already been covered. You are already existing in that state of forgiveness. So God does not hold it against you. There is not hatred or derision or anything like that right. God does not hate the saint because of their weaknesses, right? That doesn't exist because Christ has already redeemed you, brought you to faith. You start this process as a saved child of God, right? It's not like you're in the midst. It's not like you're partway through the process of being saved. Remember, salvation's a light switch. You're either saved or you're not, right? And so God doesn't hold your shortcomings against you because of the weakness of your nature, your human nature, right? And I think that is insightful, and I think it is unburdening. It will take. Oh, absolutely, right? You know,
because we didn't. I do anyway. If I don't do something like I had really planned to do it, so I didn't get it completely done, I sometimes say, "Not good at best. This is not good."
Right? Yeah.
That's the conscience, yeah.
Yeah, it was a judgment call about myself, and so this is nice.
Oh, absolutely. And I think also this helps us understand that kind of weird slippery fish we had earlier, right? That you must do good works, but you do them out of love, not compulsion. That almost doesn't quite, like I said, we can grab it, but it doesn't quite work. I think until you recognize that the falling short isn't condemned, right? And I think that's an important part of this formula, if you will, to actually have a good understanding of what's going on here, right? That good works are done freely because of love, not because of necessity in the sense of do it or you're gonna get a whooping, right? You don't do good works so that you don't go to hell, right? That's some sinners in the hands of an angry God nonsense, right? You do good works because they are free for you to do. And even when you fall short, God is not angry with you, right? Cool. I think this is a good place for us to call it, unless you have more questions. Like I said, we do have another 7-ish minutes, so if you have any questions, we can definitely hit one or two of them.
Yeah, we can't look on that as a license to sin.
Well, and right, that's the other side of these things, right? And there's always the tensions that we're living in, right? Recognizing that maybe this is a good way to phrase it, right? Falling short does not anger God. Actively disobeying does, right? And again, both are still covered in repentance, right? Think prodigal son sort of stuff, right? The prodigal son was very much actively disobeying it, and the father still welcomes him back with open arms, right? So while active disobedience is not cool, right? It's not an okay thing. Even still, grace prevails, sort of thing, right? All right, good. Well, then let us close with the Lord's Prayer, and we will continue next week. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. All right, thank you all.